Has there been any instance where a missing person has returned days, weeks, or even months after they've been kidnapped?
The only time in my experience that I've seen individuals kidnapped and actually return days later, it happens, but it happens across the border.
Yesterday marked day 30 since Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. Today we spoke with Jen Coffindaffer, a former FBI special agent, and she revealed something sinister. So I'm joined by former FBI Special Agent Jen Coffindaffer, who has extensive experience in the investigative field, and she's here to talk to me today regarding the Nancy Guthrie case. Thank you so much for joining me, Jen.
Thank you for having me.
So let me ask you this. It's been 31 days since Nancy Guthrie initially went missing, and this question I'm seeing across social media time and time and time again is, how did someone get away with this in today's day and age, considering all of the technology and surveillance at the authorities' disposal, whether it be the Pima County Sheriff's Office or the FBI? How did this happen?
Well, I tell you what, this was a case that was very well planned out. And the circumstances in which she was abducted, meaning the time in the wee hours of the night in a location that had light restrictions, in other words, no light, floodlights, any sort of light is allowed. So it really allowed them to operate in a total cover of darkness. I believe they were very familiar with her habits, this house, and this neighborhood. So all that information helped them also be successful in this abduction. You add that all together, likely not taking cellular phones, so a geofence wouldn't work, but rather communicating in radio by radio contact, as well as being very careful with masking and protecting fingerprints and DNA type evidence. You add that all together, and it leads to a lot of dead ends.
So it seems like what you're intimating here is that the person that did this took a long time to plan this out, and that they were highly sophisticated and they knew what they were doing.
I think they did know what they were doing. Initially, I think a lot of us, myself including, thought how bumbling in terms of how their holster was, the gun, how it was placed in the holster, it didn't fit. In terms of grabbing weeds and shrubbery to put up toward that camera, which again, I'm not so sure what that was really for, because you could just use your hand to do the same thing. So that piece of evidence I find very interesting. But when you look at this, certainly they did so much right. It makes me think, yes, very well planned out and sophisticated.
So considering the level of sophistication in this crime, again, like I said, it's been 31 days. It seems like neither the Pima County Sheriff's Office or the FBI have a lead. And, we're wondering, at what point does this become a cold case?
Well, first, I think this has really shifted. It's shifted into the auspices and overseeing of the FBI. I believe they are handling it in a task force like setting. The case has been moved to Phoenix now, which is the field office, as opposed to what we call a resident agency, Tucson, much smaller. And so when I saw that, you're going to see many more resources available in that Phoenix setting. You're going to see more analysts that conduct an analytical surveying of all that digital evidence you have. So to your point and to your question, this is the furthest thing from a cold case. There are so many leads and so many directions they are going in right now. I believe behind the scenes, they're drinking from a fire hose and know so much more than the public.
I'm glad you brought up the Phoenix field office, because that leads me to my next question. I wanted to ask you, if you were still in the FBI and you were in that Phoenix field office right now, and it had been over a month since Nancy Guthrie had disappeared, can you give us some examples of what steps you or the task force would be taking to generate leads or to track the people that did this?
Well, in this particular situation, you have a case agent, and there's always one case agent in charge. And this individual, from what we're hearing, there are 100 FBI agents assigned to this. To compare this to the Idaho 4 case, they only had 60 at the peak of being assigned. So you have all of these huge assets in actual agents. So what I would start out doing, of course, is dividing those agents up with very specific duties. whether they are going to be on the analysis of the digital evidence, meaning digital evidence from all the phone information and or social media information that you have leads on connected with this case. Then you're also going to look at all of the witness interviews that were conducted. In other words, when you saw all those interviews that were done, they call it canvassing in the neighborhood of Annie and Tommaso, as well as Nancy, and likely many other neighborhoods that we don't even see. You have to have somebody sort of in charge of understanding what everyone said when it comes to that. Then you have also the video surveillance, the actual physical video surveillance of vehicles and cars and cameras that are at traffic lights and all of that. You have to have somebody analyzing that. You need agents in charge of the analysts that are actually looking into that. Then you have to have another group of agents that just are in charge of these 30,000 leads that are pouring in, that might be going in all sorts of different directions. And that team is actually going to be physically running down all of this. I'm also going to have a team of my closest agents with the most experience looking at this and picking through, just like an onion. I'm going to start all over with what we knew and make sure nothing has been missed. So there is a lot going on behind the scenes.
You know, we were one of the media organizations that received these demand letters and these ransom notes. And something that stood out to us in these demand letters was that the person sending them said, "That was Nancy I saw with them south of the border." Obviously, there's no way to confirm that this person is legitimate, but is this a case that screams to you that multiple people are involved?
The only reason that I think that multiple people are involved in this is typically to perpetrate a crime like this, to take somebody under their control, to transfer them to a vehicle, to have that vehicle driven to another location where they would have been placed, whether they were alive or not alive. To do all of that typically takes more than one person. Plus, when I look at this surveillance footage and the fact that they changed locks on the back, it makes me think that entry was made from the back, went through the garage, entered the home, and then porch guy, the person that we see on video, his duty was actually to disable that camera so that Nancy could be taken from the front door vantage into the vehicle because of the close proximity. And they understood you don't want to be having a woman abductee, walked around this very large home in this area, because it could pose that they could be caught on camera more easily. So it made a lot of sense to me that there was a division of labor in this scenario and that more than one person was involved. In addition, I truly believe that I'm seeing a handheld radio to radio or device. In other words, a walkie-talkie in the pocket of porch guy. I see a small antenna, what I perceive as that, in a square type box in the pocket. You don't need a radio if you don't have any accomplices.
Wow, that's actually the first time I've ever heard someone talk about step by step how they entered the home and what their plan of action was. Obviously, there were multiple gloves found around the scene, a few miles from the scene, and DNA was obviously submitted to the CODIS system, hopefully to find some fingerprints, and no matches were made. And what does that tell you about this investigation?
So when you look at the fact that that glove that seemed to be of a lot of interest to law enforcement, I think specifically because they identified that the characteristics of that glove matched what porch guy had. And remember, what we're seeing is not what law enforcement is seeing. That video was released very quickly to the public before it was sent to Quantico, to our labs there that can take images and bring magic to them in terms of lighting and definition. And so what I believe law enforcement is looking at is much more clear than what we're seeing. Look, I saw it all the time. I would send in a license plate or vehicle and it looks like mush to me, and it comes back and I could see a number or I could see the make of a vehicle. That's what they did with that video footage, I believe. So in any event, they're able to see much more clearly than what we are able to see.
We're told that the first 48 hours are the most crucial in finding someone in a missing persons case like this. Now, we're way past that. And so we're wondering what you think the odds are of her being found either dead or alive. And is there anything that you would do differently that the FBI is currently doing or not doing?
Let me touch on really quick that CODIS question because I got down a rabbit hole and I apologize. In terms of the CODIS has millions and millions and millions of DNA profiles that are in there specifically not only from convicted individuals, but in many states from just arrested individuals. And then in addition to that, you also have all the crime scenes that have been studied by different people, and maybe there was a perpetrator found, maybe there wasn't. But if there's DNA found, that is also admitted to CODIS. So it's a huge, broad span and depth of information in there. But it doesn't come close to the number of people in the United States. So genetic genealogy, because so many people are interested in their ancestry, so they use 23andMe, Ancestry.com, and they want to know, am I a Viking? Am I a Native American? What am I? And so they submit that. And through court orders, the FBI can get all of that and they can do all of these comparisons. So I think genetic genealogy, just like what happened in the Brian Koberger/Idaho 4 case, could actually prove to be important, at least for identifying the DNA on that glove. Now, as far as your second question, as far as what I would do different, if I were in charge from the beginning, that crime scene would still be closed down. I would not have released the crime scene. There were 4 separate searches done of the crime scene. The Pima County Sheriff's Office did the first search. It lasted about 20 hours starting on Sunday and going into Monday. About 3 days later, the FBI took control of that scene and conducted another search. And then days later, the FBI realized they missed the camera on top of the roof and that they should have taken Nancy Guthrie's vehicle. So they go back for a third search and take that and who knows what else. Then on the fourth search, they realize, oh my gosh, she has a septic system. Better go in and search that. Huge errors for down the road when it comes to adjudicating this case. For any lawyer, this is going to be a field day for a defense attorney. So the number one thing you have to do with a scene like this, you have to lock it down. You have to have only one area that investigators, attorneys, whoever needs to go in there can go. It's a set path. So you make sure to keep anything that they might transfer in that particular area, which is outside of the, totality of your actual crime scene area. I also would have totally kept media away. I would have kept them at least several blocks away. And then I would have kept the command posts for law enforcement and officers on the opposite side to keep everything separated so you don't even have to worry about any leaks. And so I would have handled the beginning and the infancy of this case much different.
Obviously, Savannah Guthrie has had a lot to say on social media about the disappearance of her mother, even going as far as stating that she may already be gone. And I'm wondering how you might assess those odds.
The first 48 hours isn't just cliche. And I actually, in a case like this, might really say the first 24. This is a situation where somebody's life was on the line. It needed the full court press and proper investigation from the beginning. I'm not saying that wasn't done. I'm just saying because each day that ticks by, there's a less and less chance that Nancy Guthrie will ever be found alive. As far as solving this case, I think it will be solved. And it's going to be solved, in my opinion, because of that camera footage that Google and the FBI was able to extract by peeling away the time and information that was on those hard drives and determining this particular footage. I mean, it's really quite remarkable they were able to do that without it being stored on the cloud. And somebody recognizes this person. If this were my husband, my brother, my cousin, somebody I knew well, I would 100% know who this was. So distinctive, his eyebrows, the way his mustache sits, his lips, his tone, how he dresses, where he likes to get his clothes from, possibly. And all of that fits into a profile that you would know if you were close to that person.
In your experience in missing persons cases or any cases that you've heard of in the FBI, has there been any instance where a missing person has returned days, weeks, or even months after they've been kidnapped? Have you ever seen that before in your experience?
The only time in my experience that I've seen individuals kidnapped and actually return days later, it happens, but it happens across the border. Cartels have very specific manners and ways they make money. We all know about drug trafficking. We know about human trafficking. We know about coyoting people across illegally. But one of the main ways they make money south of the border is by conducting kidnappings. And this has gone on for decades. We have always had, meaning the Bureau has always had, hostage negotiators assigned to these types of situations. And as long as the family comes up with the money, in most cases, they give the person back. They might be beat up. They might have horrible things that have happened to them, but they return them because it's a business. They directly contact the relatives in very short order, and they negotiate the amount of money that's going to be paid. And just imagine if they stopped returning the people, you wouldn't have a business anymore. It's a quid pro quo. So those cases, yes, absolutely. North of the border in the United States, I can't think of them.
It almost sounds like you're intimating, and sorry, just one more question. It almost sounds like you're suggesting that Nancy Guthrie did go south of the border, and that is what your assessment is. Would you say that's accurate?
So I do not believe that any cartels or any Mexican nationals would risk, especially in these moments of our border being so tight that we actually have negative immigration numbers, more people going out than are coming in. No way are they going to risk coming in to abduct an 84-year-old. So no, I do not believe they came from the south. Do I believe it's possible that they transported her south after? I think that is at least a possibility that must be considered. You only have to flash an ID to go into Mexico. There's going to be no search of your vehicle. Throw her in that trunk, go over there, go to a desolate place, and you could keep her alive as long as you could. Or if she wasn't alive, you could easily dispose of her, and likely she would never, never be found again. She could also still, though, be in the United States. The desert that is near Nancy Guthrie's house, research showed me there's over 4,000 bodies that have been found in recent years from that desert. 4,000. A lot of people will say, well, they're illegal aliens that came over. There's, other reasons that, no, listen, 4,000 bodies. The point is, it's easy to hide a body. It's easy for a body to be there for a huge length of time and never be discovered. And if I'm the abductor, that's what I want if Nancy is no longer with us.
Jen, thank you so much for joining me. You have been absolutely fantastic.
Thank you.
Of course.
So where you can find me is on Twitter. X is my #1 account, and that is Coffindaffer FBI, at Coffindaffer FBI. I also do have a podcast, and that is named Break the Case with Jen Coffindaffer, and that's on YouTube and every place you find podcasts. And finally, I want to say I am the News Nation law and justice contributor, a position that has just been so great to me. So 3 places.
This interview provided some incredibly important insight. If you want us to interview anybody else, drop it down in the comments because we read them all the time. As always, my name is Jakson Buhaj, and I will see you in the next one.